I stood outside the church soaked in rain, my heart pounding. Inside, my son was reading my obituary. Everyone was dressed in black, silent heads bowed. My photo sat framed, surrounded by pristine white flowers. They said I had passed away 3 days ago. But clearly, I was still breathing, still standing here. I had walked into my own funeral, and no one, not a single soul, saw that I was alive. I lost my husband when I was 36. Since then, it had just been me and Tyler. I taught during the day, did bookkeeping at night, scraping together every penny to raise my son without asking anyone for help, never leaning on anyone. Tyler was kind, respectful, smart. He once wrote, "One day I'll buy my mom a house that overlooks the ocean." I believed him. I've kept that essay to this day. We used to be close. Everything started to change when he met Ashley. Ashley had once been my student, bright but dishonest. I gave her a failing grade for plagiarizing an essay straight off the internet. She never apologized. She just stayed silent. Years later, she walked back into my house with a new title, my son's wife. I didn't protest. Though it felt uneasy, I treated her kindly, invited them over for dinner, sent gifts. But slowly, they drifted away. The calls became fewer. The texts got shorter. Invitations stopped coming. Once I dropped by unannounced. They were having friends over. I was invited to sit in the kitchen. No one asked how I was, I asked. "What happens when I'm old?" Ashley responded casually. "You already have a house." "We'll arrange something when the time comes." Arrange something. It sounded like moving an old piece of furniture out of the way. I was no longer important. Not in the wedding photos, not in the family group chat, not in their future plans. I began to disappear. No warning, no explanation, not a word. I showed up at my son's house on Christmas afternoon, just like every year. I brought a homemade pumpkin loaf and a jar of cranberry jam made from my mother's old recipe. The gifts were wrapped carefully, 2 hand-crocheted scarves for the couple, and a box of crayons for my 4-year-old granddaughter, whom I barely saw long enough to remember her face. I knocked. Ashley opened the door. She wore a velvet red dress perfectly made up, her hair curled into soft waves. She smiled lightly. "Oh, you're here. Everyone's in the back. By the way, you're not in the new family group chat yet." The words were casual, almost offhand, but they stuck in my mind like a thorn. New family group chat. Am I even still family in that group? I stepped inside. The house was beautifully decorated, wreaths on the wall, string lights across the kitchen, a dining table filled with both Western and Asian dishes. There were a dozen people, friends and coworkers of Tyler and Ashley. No one really knew me. I handed Ashley the loaf and gifts. She gave a polite smile, nodded, then placed them on top of the fridge, unopened, unacknowledged. They had set up a long dining table in the living room. Each seat had a handwritten name tag. Mine was the only one without a name. I quietly took the last empty seat at the end of the table next to the dog's water bowl and beside the fridge. Tyler glanced at me for just a second, then turned to the person beside him to talk about work. Not once during dinner did he ask if I was doing okay. He didn't tell me anything. He didn't mention a single memory between us. I tried to smile. I carved a piece of roast chicken onto my plate, sipped some wine, and poured another glass myself. No one checked in. No one offered anything. I was just a shadow present, but invisible. After dinner, I rolled up my sleeves and stepped into the kitchen to help clean up. Ashley turned her voice gentle. "Mom, please have a seat." "We've got it. These dishes are fragile." I heard what she really meant. No need to say more. I nodded, wiped my hands with a kitchen towel, and sat quietly in the corner. Their friends gathered and laughed. One of them asked me, "Are you Ashley's neighbor?" I didn't answer, just smiled faintly. That question said it all. As the guests began leaving, I stood up to get my coat ready to go. Then I heard Ashley in the kitchen speaking to another woman. Maybe my mother-in-law should start thinking about her assets. Accidents happen unexpectedly. I froze in the hallway. That comment wasn't said directly to me, but it was clear enough for me to realize I was being considered as a liability, as something to be dealt with. I didn't say anything to Tyler as I left. He walked me to the door and said quietly, "Stay warm, Mom." It was a full house today. I didn't get a chance to talk. I smiled. No blame. But deep down, I knew if he'd wanted to, a hug would have taken only a few seconds. In the days that followed, I kept trying, sent birthday cards to my granddaughter, texted Tyler to check in, no replies, no messages, no thank yous. A week later, I decided to drop by unannounced. It was cold, so I brought hot soup, hoping to warm up more than just the weather. But when I got there, the gate was locked. As I was about to call, I heard Ashley's voice inside the house on the phone. No, she hasn't transferred the house title yet, but soon. I stepped back, standing silently in the front yard, soup in hand, eyes fixed on the nameplate still bearing my name. Soon. They didn't need me as a mother. They just needed me as the key holder. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table. My phone pinged with the monthly electricity bill reminder. As usual, I opened the banking app to pay. I had done this routinely on the 3rd of every month. My budget was tight, so I monitored every expense closely. I entered my login credentials. The familiar interface appeared. But when I selected my account and hit send payment, the screen flashed red. Transaction failed, account locked. User does not exist. I frowned, tried again. Same result. I re-entered my login. Access denied. I tapped forgot password. A new message appeared, account permanently closed. I sat in stunned silence. I was still breathing. My heart was still beating. But the bank where I'd kept my savings for nearly 30 years had declared that I no longer existed. On a chilly February morning, I received a letter from the bank. I opened it at the kitchen table like always. But this time, it wasn't a bank statement. The very first line made my hands freeze. We are processing a property title transfer for the account holder, Patricia Moore. I read it 3 times. The house I was living in, the home I'd owned since 1994, was being transferred. I had never signed anything, never agreed to sell. I called the bank immediately. The woman on the other end spoke in a flat professional tone. The file includes a valid power of attorney notarized with a signature matching our records. I never submitted any documents, I said firmly. She paused for a moment, then replied, if there's an error, you may file a formal complaint, but this file has already been confirmed by Tyler Moore as the beneficiary. My son's name, plain, cold, stamped across the document like a clean, swift blade. I called Tyler, no answer. Called again, still nothing. I texted, no response. The next day I went to his house. It was cold, drizzling. I carried a copy of the bank file needing answers. The house was quiet. I knocked several times. No one came to the door. As I turned to leave, the neighbor next door called out, they're in Iceland. For 2 weeks, Ashley said they went on a winter trip. I stood on my son's doorstep, holding the damp file folder in the rain, feeling completely hollow. I didn't know where they went, who they went with, or when they'd return. No one thought I needed to know. That night, I tried logging into the email account I had used to manage my property paperwork. The password didn't work. I tapped forgot password. A message popped up. Password changed from unknown device, iPhone 15, Pro Houston, TX. I had never been to Houston, never used an iPhone 15, and suddenly things started to make sense. 2 days later, someone knocked on my door. It was Linda, the librarian from our town's library, where I had volunteered for years. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, as she held out a white envelope. I wasn't sure who else to give this to, but it was sent to the library with your name on it. I opened the envelope. A death certificate, my name, my birth date. Even the cause of death was listed, stroke at home. I stood there, heart pounding, breath steady, mind spinning. Linda whispered, I thought you were gone. A lot of people did. I didn't know who to believe anymore. I replied softly, I'm still alive, at least as of this morning. I tried to check my retirement account. Closed. I called the Department of Education. They confirmed my records had been marked deceased. They were even preparing a memorial service for retired teachers next month, and I was on the list. I went to my old school. The young principal meeting me for the first time stammered, I'm so sorry. We got the news of your passing from your daughter-in-law. There was official confirmation from the local office. I didn't argue. I just stood there, listening, like a shadow. I went home and sat in my old armchair, turned on the reading lamp, but no words made it into my head. In the eyes of the law, I was already dead. In my son's mind, I had already disappeared. I was no longer on the property title, no longer in the family, no longer present in any legal form. No one laid a hand on me, but they had constructed a death step by step, planned, signed, and sealed, and I knew the funeral would be the next step. That afternoon, I sat in my cold kitchen. Gray light streamed through the small window, casting a shadow on the unpaid electricity bill. The only sounds were the ticking clock and the ache of an empty stomach. I had no idea where to even begin. My phone buzzed. It was Marcia, my best friend for over 30 years. Before I could answer, her text appeared, "Where are you? I'm at your funeral." I froze. My funeral. Another message followed, this time with a photo. St. Paul's Church. My portrait was displayed on a flower-covered altar, framed by white roses. Below it, in bold black letters, "In loving memory of Patricia Moore, a devoted mother and respected teacher." I hadn't even processed the shock when another message popped up. "This morning on the way to the church, I saw someone in an olive green coat just like yours. I was in a rush, couldn't stop. But now, I'm sure it was you. Still, I had to come and see, who are they really burying?" I dropped my phone, I called a taxi, and rushed to the church. The misty rain blurred the car windows, but my mind was crystal clear. This was no mistake. Someone had deliberately tried to erase me from this world, and Marcia, the only one still thinking clearly, had seen the truth. I approached the church entrance. Posted outside on the notice board was the obituary: Patricia Moore, passed away March 3rd. Today was March 3rd. My heart was still beating. I pushed the door open. Inside was silent, the soft hum of the organ and the scent of white flowers mixed with rain in the air. The church was packed. So many familiar faces, former teachers, neighbors, old colleagues. Everyone dressed in dark colors, everyone solemn. On the main stage, Tyler stood holding the obituary sheet. His hands were shaking and his voice cracked. "My mother was the strongest woman I've ever known. Through all her losses, she never gave up. Today I say goodbye, as she moves on to another place." He wept, but I saw no tears. In the front row, Ashley sat composed in a black dress, holding a tissue in one hand, a bouquet of white roses in the other. Her eyes were red. She bowed and thanked each person who came to mourn. They had scripted a perfect scene, clean, polished, believable. There were witnesses, a eulogy, a framed portrait, an official obituary. Just one thing was missing: I wasn't dead. I walked down the center aisle of the church. My rain-soaked shoes clacked loudly against the wooden floor. At first, only a few people turned around. Then the entire row followed. Some gasped. Others stood up in shock. Marcia saw me first. She stayed calmer than the rest. Then Tyler turned. He froze, completely still. The obituary paper slipped from his hands and fluttered to the floor. Ashley looked at me, a look that lasted no more than 2 seconds. But I'll never forget it. No shock, no fear, only rage and defeat. I kept walking toward the front, stopped in the middle of the sanctuary. I didn't need a microphone, I just spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Seems like I showed up a little early for my own death." A woman screamed. Someone dropped a candle holder. For 30 seconds, the whole room erupted into chaos. Then Tyler turned, stepped off the pulpit, and walked away. He didn't look at me, didn't say a word, didn't greet a single person. Ashley remained seated, face emotionless, as if none of this was unexpected. Just a few days later, Daniel, a former student of mine, now a lawyer, sent me a preliminary investigation report. "You know," he said, "Ashley was the one who filed the death certificate. She hired a private attorney, used forged documents, and had already contacted a real estate office to begin the house sale process. Ashley, the same student I once failed for plagiarism, had returned not with an essay, but with a forged death, backed by stamps, lawyers, and legal forms, all to rewrite my ending. Not with a pen, but with a seal. I hadn't disappeared, and I wasn't going to stay silent." That afternoon, I went to see Sandra Quinn, a mid-career attorney in Westlake and Marcia's niece, a former prosecutor, sharp, reserved. She didn't say much after hearing my story. She just looked at me for a long time, then said flatly, "They didn't just try to steal your property. They erased you from the legal system. That's a criminal act. I sat up straighter. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a place, a value not as a mother, but as a citizen who had been wronged. At one point, I asked Sandra why she believed me so quickly, when all I had was a wild story and no proof. She didn't answer right away. She just slowly turned a pen in her hand and said, "My mother lost her house the same way. Back then, the house was co-owned with her cousin. One morning it was sold without notice, forged signatures, shady documents. Sandra was just a second-year law student at the time. By the time she graduated, the statute of limitations had expired. Her mother moved into a small rented room and lived out the rest of her life quietly." Sandra didn't say much more, but the look in her eyes said it all. This wasn't anger. This was a wound, a lifelong scar that never fully healed. I didn't press for more. All I knew was that this wasn't just about helping me. This was about redemption for her, too. And now I was her second chance to make things right. Sandra began investigating immediately. Within 3 days, she traced the death certificate filed from a small medical office in another county, signed by a physician who wasn't even licensed in the state. The power of attorney documents filed under the wrong district. My signature scanned from an old sample, then digitally pasted onto the transfer forms. All of it fake. But Sandra didn't stop there. One late evening, she called me, her voice more urgent than usual. "Patricia, do you know the name Frank Delaney?" I paused, thinking, then shook my head. Sandra let out a quiet breath through the phone. Frank used to be a well-known notary in a neighboring district. 3 years ago, he was disbarred, caught up in a scandal involving a fraudulent property transfer. The victim was an elderly woman who lived alone with no next of kin. The case went nowhere. She passed away shortly after discovering her home had been sold. A chill ran down my spine. Sandra continued, "The problem is, even though Frank was disbarred, his name still appears on several recent power of attorney filings, including the paperwork for your house." I froze. Sandra paused, then explained more clearly Frank didn't do it. Ashley impersonated him. She used his old credentials to notarize documents, knowing that many people still believed he was practicing. And because complaints about Frank were buried in the past, no one's really checking anymore. A bigger picture began to form. Ashley wasn't acting alone. She knew how to slip through the cracks. She knew how to exploit the name of a disgraced notary to forge what looked like legal transactions. I shivered at the thought I wasn't the first, and if we didn't see this through, I surely wouldn't be the last. Sandra submitted the file to the Financial Crimes Unit along with a list of 3 other properties that had been notarized by Frank after his license was revoked. "We're uncovering a whole operation," she said. "And Ashley, she's the link between money, the legal system, and greed. I filed formal complaints with the land registry and the bank. Sandra issued an immediate injunction halting all property transfers until the investigation was complete. At the same time, she dug into Ashley's records. The company behind the house transfer had changed names 3 times in just 2 years. Each name change was meant to cover up tax debts and avoid legal scrutiny. Ashley knew the law, but Sandra understood it better. I didn't sit back. I needed to hear the truth from my son. I needed to know, was he a willing accomplice or just being pulled along? I bought a new SIM card and called Tyler, posing as a bank representative requesting beneficiary verification. I recorded the entire call. He picked up after 5 rings. His voice was tired and flat. "I know. Ashley handled everything. I just signed. She told me my mom wouldn't be needing any of it anymore." I hung up, handed the recording to Sandra. She wasn't surprised. The next day, I went to the notary office and revised my entire will. I removed Tyler completely, wiped out every clause that left him anything. Instead, I created a small scholarship fund for students studying education, especially those like me back then, poor alone, but determined. The house where I once lived grew flowers. Hung Tyler's first-grade paintings was now evidence. No longer a home, Sandra filed a lawsuit. The claim stated fraudulent impersonation of a living individual, legal manipulation for the purpose of asset theft. Defendant Ashley Moore. Criminal charges were possible. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the papers, but my eyes were steady. I had never sued anyone in my life. I was a literature teacher, not a fighter. But if they could stage a funeral for me while I was still breathing, then I had every right to reclaim my place with facts, with law, with truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't entering a battle as a mother, but as a person who finally knew her worth. I used to think I was the first. Turns out, I was just the last one still willing to stay silent. While going through Ashley's legal history, Sandra discovered something strange. A beachfront condo once owned by Agnes Holloway had been transferred to Ashley's old company in 2013, the same year Agnes was admitted to a care facility for memory loss. Agnes wasn't a stranger. She was Ashley's aunt. We visited the private nursing home in a nearby county. The elderly woman lay in bed, hair snow-white, hands trembling, but her eyes still clear. When Sandra mentioned the condo in Monterey, Agnes was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I used to live there." But then someone said I needed to sign a temporary transfer for medical paperwork. After that, they never let me go back. She never filed a complaint, had no one to turn to, didn't understand the law. We reviewed the condo transfer documents. It was the exact same method forged identity, fake notarized authority, intermediary law office, signature scanned from an old benefits application. Patricia no longer felt angry, only a cold chill up her spine. Ashley hadn't made up these tactics just for me. She'd done it before and gotten away with it, but not this time. Sandra submitted the supplemental file to the authorities, this time including evidence of targeting elderly individuals with diminished capacity. The likelihood of criminal prosecution now significantly higher. I went to visit Agnes again. This time, I brought a printed image of her old condo taken from Google Street View. She stared at it for a long time. Then tears fell. I didn't say a word, but in my heart I understood something clearly. One person's silence can allow evil to grow. But when those who've been wronged stand together, the truth is no longer alone. That morning I arrived at the courthouse early. With a folder of printed documents in hand, I sat in the hallway watching people come and go, listening to the echo of heels on the cold marble floor. Next to me, Sandra quietly reviewed the timeline. She didn't say much. She simply placed a firm hand on my shoulder enough to say she was with me. Around 9, we were called in. Ashley walked in first, dressed like she was attending a corporate meeting. Polished, confident, expressionless. Tyler followed behind. No suit, no tie. He looked tired, unkempt, and nothing like the man who had once stood at a pulpit and read a fake eulogy. The hearing began. Sandra laid out the evidence one piece at a time, the fake death certificate, the falsified power of attorney with my forged signature, the recorded phone call where Tyler admitted Ashley had done everything, the bank statements showing suspicious transfers. Her assistant submitted additional files. 3 companies registered under Ashley's name over the past 3 years, all linked to the same office address showing patterns of tax evasion and suspected money laundering. No one spoke in the courtroom. No one even smiled. The judge called both defendants to the stand. Ashley stood first. "I was just following Tyler's instructions," she said. "I only signed what he told me to. He said his mother was declining and needed everything settled early." She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, eyes downcast like she'd rehearsed it all. Tyler remained silent. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just stared at the table in front of him, fists clenched under his seat. Sandra gave me a nod. I stood. I walked up to the witness stand and looked around. The courtroom was completely silent. I'm not here to fight over money. I don't want my son to come back to me. I don't even need an apology. All I want is recognition that I still exist, that I can't be erased from this life with a single sheet of paper. I paused, turned to look at Tyler. I don't need him to love me. I just want to be respected as a human being. Tyler looked up. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, shame and regret. Then he lowered his head again and said nothing. The judge ruled. The property transfer was declared null and void. Tyler's inheritance rights were permanently revoked. Ashley's case was forwarded to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Ashley screamed in the courtroom, "You knew everything. Why didn't you say anything?" Tyler remained silent. I thought it was over. The court had ruled. I kept my home. My legal identity was restored. I thought I could finally live in peace running my little seaside class. But Ashley wasn't done. I received a notice from the Department of Education. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my class was illegal. No license, no proper facilities. I hadn't opened a school. I was just teaching a few local kids for free a couple times a week. No sign, no tuition, just chalk paper and heart. Sandra traced the complaint to an anonymous law office. The managing partner, an old associate of Ashley's. She couldn't take the house, so now she wanted to destroy my reputation. A week later, the local newspaper ran a headline, "Former teacher faked her death, opens illegal school." They'd snapped a photo of me without my knowledge. The comment section was full of insults. No one asked for my side. No one came to see the class. I closed the door. Went quiet. A week passed. Then one day, a boy showed up at my door holding a handwritten essay. It was neat, carefully penned. At the bottom of the page was a name, Dylan Moore. I asked who his mother was. He replied, Ashley. I stood there stunned. Dylan was Ashley's son, but not Tyler's. He was a good kid, honest. He didn't carry his mother's cold expression. I called Sandra. She said if Dylan was willing, he could serve as a witness. We didn't pressure him. We simply asked. Dylan agreed to write a letter. In it, he said only one thing. If it weren't for this class, I wouldn't know I still had a chance. We submitted his letter along with our formal response. 2 weeks later, I received word there were no violations. I could continue teaching as long as I didn't charge tuition. Ashley had lost again, this time to her own flesh and blood. I reopened the class. No signage, no announcements. Just one more chair reserved for Dylan. The day I left the courtroom, someone was waiting in the hallway. Daniel, my former student, salt and pepper hair glasses holding a USB drive. Do you remember me? He asked. I was at your funeral that day. I knew you weren't dead, but I wanted proof. He handed the USB to Sandra. It contained a video clip he'd taken on his phone, footage of Ashley accepting flowers, nodding and thanking mourners, confirming publicly that I had passed away. The clip was enough to strengthen the case if further charges were needed. I asked him, why did you come? He answered, because back in school you were the only person who believed I didn't plagiarize. I owe you the truth. One late afternoon, Daniel showed up at my house, unannounced. I was cutting paper for the next day's class when I heard a knock. He stood there in a rolled-up shirt, holding a brown leather-bound notebook, old and worn. This used to be yours, he said. I found it in the school archive when I visited my mom. I thought, you should have it back. I opened it. The first page was written in shaky, childish handwriting. If my mom ever disappears, I'll go find her. It was a poem Tyler had written when he was 12, one I had laminated hidden in an old drawer and lost during a move. I stared at those words for a long time, not to cry, but to remember. There once was a child who truly meant that for me, and that meant something, even if it belonged to the past. Daniel sat with me for a while. We didn't speak much, but before he left, he said, you didn't just teach me how to write. You taught me how to stand when the world misunderstood me. Now it's my turn to return that lesson to you. A month after the trial, I received a letter with the letterhead of the Chronicle, the state's biggest newspaper. They requested an interview about my story. I declined. I didn't need to be in the news. But the article ran anyway. The front page of the weekend edition carried the headline, "Buried Alive on Paper When the Law Becomes a Tool for Greed." They cited my case alongside 3 others that had occurred in the past 2 years, each involving forged signatures, fake powers of attorney, and the quiet theft of assets from elderly people living alone with no legal protection. The article outlined key failures: no cross-county verification system, paper records still widely used, notary processes lacking biometric confirmation. I read it with chills and a lump in my throat. I had thought I was an exception, but I was simply the one lucky enough to survive and tell the story. A week later, the state governor's office issued a statement. They were reviewing Senate Bill SB 1187, a proposal to require biometric verification for all property transfers involving individuals over 65, including a mandatory third-party witness, and recorded video consent. A spokesperson said to the press, "We can't allow anyone to be declared dead while they're still breathing, just because of a misused stamp." They didn't mention my name, but I knew my case had been the final straw, the blow that cracked the door so many had knocked on in vain. That afternoon, I stood in front of the class watching the children run toward the beach laughing. Dylan turned back, waving at me, his mouth still smudged with chalk dust, grinning from ear to ear. I smiled back. I had reclaimed more than just my house, my name, or my bank account. I had reclaimed the right to exist, truly exist for myself and for those who would come after me. Dylan was Ashley's son, but not Tyler's. He was a good kid, honest. He didn't carry his mother's cold expression. I called Sandra. She said if Dylan was willing, he could serve as a witness. We didn't pressure him. We simply asked. Dylan agreed to write a letter. In it, he said only one thing. If it weren't for this class, I wouldn't know I still had a chance. We submitted his letter along with our formal response. 2 weeks later, I received word there were no violations. I could continue teaching as long as I didn't charge tuition. Ashley had lost again, this time to her own flesh and blood. I reopened the class. No signage, no announcements, just one more chair reserved for Dylan. The day I left the courtroom, someone was waiting in the hallway. Daniel, my former student, salt and pepper hair glasses holding a USB drive. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "I was at your funeral that day. I knew you weren't dead, but I wanted proof." He handed the USB to Sandra. It contained a video clip he'd taken on his phone, footage of Ashley accepting flowers, nodding, and thanking mourners, confirming publicly that I had passed away. The clip was enough to strengthen the case if further charges were needed. I asked him, "Why did you come?" He answered, "Because back in school you were the only person who believed I didn't plagiarize. I owe you the truth." One late afternoon, Daniel showed up at my house, unannounced. I was cutting paper for the next day's class when I heard a knock. He stood there in a rolled-up shirt holding a brown leather-bound notebook, old and worn. "This used to be yours," he said. "I found it in the school archive when I visited my mom. I thought, you should have it back." I opened it. The first page was written in shaky, childish handwriting. "If my mom ever disappears, I'll go find her." It was a poem Tyler had written when he was 12, one I had laminated hidden in an old drawer and lost during a move. I stared at those words for a long time, not to cry, but to remember. There once was a child who truly meant that for me, and that meant something, even if it belonged to the past. Daniel sat with me for a while. We didn't speak much, but before he left, he said, "You didn't just teach me how to write. You taught me how to stand when the world misunderstood me. Now it's my turn to return that lesson to you." A month after the trial, I received a letter with the letterhead of the Chronicle, the state's biggest newspaper. They requested an interview about my story. I declined. I didn't need to be in the news, but the article ran anyway. The front page of the weekend edition carried the headline, "Buried Alive on Paper, When the Law Becomes a Tool for Greed." They cited my case alongside 3 others that had occurred in the past 2 years, each involving forged signatures, fake powers of attorney, and the quiet theft of assets from elderly people living alone with no legal protection. The article outlined key failures. No cross-county verification system. Paper records still widely used. Notary processes lacking biometric confirmation. I read it with chills and a lump in my throat. I had thought I was an exception, but I was simply the one lucky enough to survive and tell the story. A week later, the state governor's office issued a statement. They were reviewing Senate Bill SB 1187, a proposal to require biometric verification for all property transfers involving individuals over 65, including a mandatory third-party witness and recorded video consent. A spokesperson said to the press, "We can't allow anyone to be declared dead while they're still breathing, just because of a misused stamp." They didn't mention my name, but I knew my case had been the final straw, the blow that cracked the door so many had knocked on in vain. That afternoon, I stood in front of the class watching the children run toward the beach laughing. Dylan turned back waving at me, his mouth still smudged with chalk dust, grinning from ear to ear. I smiled back. I had reclaimed more than just my house, my name, or my bank account. I had reclaimed the right to exist, truly exist for myself and for those who would come after me. And what about you? In a world where silence can erase someone, would you choose to stay quiet or would you speak up for those who can't? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved, you hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you in the next story, where healing begins one truth at a time.